Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Epsilon from Home. I'm Jason Simon, an SVP in our travel and hospitality practice over here at Epsilon. I'm joined by my normal two, I don't know what to call them, I guess co-hosts, cohorts, people I work with. Rob Cosentino, how you doing, Rob?
Good. I'm pushing the limits of my hair growth every week, and so far it's barely manageable. So we'll see what happens next week.
Yeah, it really looks terrible. and then we got Bob Brown. Hey Bob, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Loving the sunshine here in Turks and Caicos. Getting out and enjoying the world.
Turks and Caicos looks a little bit like Colorado, though, doesn't it?
Yeah, it depends on the angle. From
Excellent.
my angle, yeah.
Yeah. So we're not alone this week from Colorado. Joining us today is Stacy Hawes. Stacy is the president of our data practice here at Epsilon. Stacy, welcome aboard. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, I'm glad you're here, and as we've told you before, it really is a little bit of a show and whatnot, trying to have good conversation about our marketplace and everything that we're up to. And really, we're just thrilled to have you here today and to talk a little bit about your expertise, which is of course data. Over the course of the previous videos that we've done, we've talked a lot about having to declutter your marketing, taking a look at programs and things of that nature, which may or may not be working. Obviously, in the situation we're all in right now, it's a little bit unique to anything we've all experienced. But thematically, everything that we've talked about kind of centers around a core component, which is data, which is your world, Stacy, which is really what drives the engines that we all work with. And so it'd be great for you to give us a little overview of your view of the world and also, some insight onto how our clients and customers think about using data and what the value propositions are that you guys drive for them.
Sure. Well, again, I'm excited to be here. Thank you for including me in what you've told me is going to be a circus. So I'm excited to see what the next 20 minutes is about.
Well, we certainly have the clowns here for sure. So.
But you said it right. I mean, data really, I consider the fuel to fuel the marketing engine. And without it, you really can't do personalized, relevant marketing, which is what we're all striving to do today.
Right.
And if you think about the different types of data that are out there and available for use, it really spans. There's everything from descriptive data, which I would consider more demographic and attitudinal or lifestyle type of data, versus transactional data, which is super unique and really what I consider to be the truth. And I say that in all fairness, because the purchase history of what someone has done is really the best indicator of what they're going to do moving forward. And philosophically at Epsilon, I think of it in kind of three ways, and it's a good, better, best approach. The demographic, the age information, how many people in the household, very important. That's good data to have. That attitudinal or more lifestyle type of information is better, so that's going to help you tailor your communications. But really the holy grail is that transactional information, because you want to use the data in a meaningful way. Most of our clients really come to us for maybe four primary use cases. One is really getting to know the consumer, who your customers are. Data can inform that. So what you know is just a slice of what they're doing out there as a consumer across everybody else and all the channels. So knowing who your customers are, being able to do more analytics off that information, figuring out who on your file are going to be your best customers or your most loyal versus who you're going to have to try to convince more to come back. And then ultimately using data for new customer acquisition, I think is also a very important use case. But foundationally, I would say knowing who that customer is critical.
Stacy, when you mentioned transactional data, like my mind immediately goes to first party. And, if I'm doing a good job of capturing data about my own customers, it starts with transactions. But I know from our previous conversations, you're talking more broadly than that from a transactional point, right?
Yeah, I am. So it's critical to have your own first party data, but then enhancing that with third party transactional information is really what's going to make it sing. Understanding channel preference, true timing of purchase, cadence of purchase, category of purchase, all of those things that you can use to enhance so that you know even more the first plus the third party data.
Stacey, it's interesting. You know, one of the things we've sort of talked about in previous episodes is this notion of sort of like, you know, there's a lot of business as usual happening. And this is sort of the perfect time to sort of like myth bust or sort of deconstruct a lot of what you're doing and take a fresh look at it. And again, we were all talking about this earlier, like we've all been working with our partners and clients, and we sort of noticed them doing stuff and they were sort of operating under their own biases. I mean, do you have any great examples of partners and clients you've worked with where you're actually sort of able to debunk some of their preconceived notions and get to a better strategy?
Yeah, I do. And I think I will leave the names out to protect the innocent. This isn't meant to be a game. So one that comes to mind is a discount airline company who came to us and said, you know, we know exactly who our customers are. They're young and non-affluent. And by overlaying what we know about their consumers, we found actually just the opposite. They did have a small segment of their file that were young and not quite as affluent yet, but the vast majority of their customers were in the older demographic and they were very affluent. So you can, just from that information alone, start to tailor how you talk to those consumers. And, you know, being in this crazy, not usual time that we're in, it's more important now than ever to be able to resonate and have your message really speak to those consumers. So I think that that's a good example.
Not only that, Stacey, I don't want to interrupt, but misspending your marketing budget, targeting the wrong audience.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Which makes me think of another example. One of our cruise clients, they thought that they had a very loyal file, so that their cruisers were only cruising with them. They really weren't taking a whole lot of other vacations. And when we overlaid some of that other purchase history and transactional information, lo and behold, they were spending a lot of money with their competitors, as well as on other types of, you know, vacation and travel and hospitality. So, you know, looking at your file and thinking you've got this false loyalty of your consumers is going to misdirect your spend. And it's also going to misdirect how you're talking to them.
Yeah. And I mean, from my experience, and, you know, that's the holy grail, like understanding what your customers are doing when they're not with you. And that idea of, you know, you're making assumptions at a travel brand when you're looking only internally at your own data, making assumptions around what is loyalty. And, you know, maybe somebody who makes 3 trips is what you view as a loyal customer, but the reality of what they're actually doing elsewhere, I'm not at all shocked to hear that example of somebody totally shifting their thinking on it.
Right. 3 trips may be on the high end for you from what you see on average on your file. Maybe it's an average of 1.5, and these are making, you know, 3 purchases or trips with you a year, but lo and behold, they're doing 7 others with another brand outside of you. And their wallets are open, there's share to be taken there. So you're missing that opportunity in that way.
I mean, it's a great example, and it's sort of, you know, I think we've all talked about this, like now is the time for greater wallet share, right? Because for all the loyalty programs, they've extended status, right? So like the notion of loyalty has just sort of dropped significantly within 2020. So I think that incremental share to be had outside of your core brand, I think, Bob and Stacey, to your point, like now is the year. There's probably no other time in the past 20 years where they can actually go out and get some of that incremental share when people start traveling again, like outside of their core loyal customers.
Yeah, and we've talked before this call, consumers are really free agents right now. So everything is fair game. What you thought you knew about a consumer 60 days ago is now different because all of our behaviors are changing. You know, right? My personal habits are changing and what I would have done, you know, maybe not even 60 days ago, but 30 days ago. So being able to be in market and giving the right message to the right consumer it's probably more critical now than ever before in our history, and such a huge opportunity to be able to go capture some of that wallet share.
In a lot of my travels in our sector and talking to a lot of CMOs and marketing leads and folks that are responsible for this, I always get the sense from them that they feel that they may have enough data on hand or, you know, a significant amount of information available that they are able to make those decisions. But listening to you talk about the fact that, you know, in the 2 examples you gave, that those brands didn't know who their audiences were, or at least significantly were shifted. How does that happen, Stacey? Because it would seem to me that when we talk to everybody they tell us, hey, we've got rows and rows of data. What's causing the disconnect from?
Okay, how much time do we have? No. Where to begin? So there's two things happening. One is they have no data except their own first party data. So there's a lot of brands that are just operating off of that, kind of like one eye shut, looking at not a full picture. And then there's the other extreme where some of these companies have fallen into the allure of big data. So the, volumes and velocity of data that are available out there, and they've gone out and they've purchased this mass data file, overlaid their own file. And now they're in this position where they're almost frozen because they have so much information, they don't know what to do with it. Mm-hmm. And so often we end up talking to brands and marketers who have brought information in, and 6 to 12 months later, they haven't even done anything with it yet because they didn't know where to start. Yeah. So that's even worse.
It's interesting. Maybe a question for both Bob and Stacy. It's, we sort of, on our team, we've coined this term sort of like how to use what data when. Because I think, Stacy, to the example you provided, like, it's sort of like either people are paralyzed or they're sort of making wrongful decisions off the wrong data set. And if you've got a large marketing organization, you probably got about 60 to 80 marketers making independent decisions on a daily basis and possibly misusing the wrong types of data for that decision making. And, I'm sort of curious from your perspective, is this a singular observation? Have you guys seen this before? Is it a common problem amongst clients and brands?
I see it over and over.
What was that, Stacy?
I see it all the time.
Yeah.
That's my world.
Yeah, I think, the challenge, the information overload challenge, and then some consistency. And I think, part of it, which I won't get into now, speaks to the centralized, decentralized, where do you have some of those decision rights? Where are you pushing out information? But, for me, it's always about start with what are you going to do with it? And I think it goes to, the common problem Stacy described of, if I'm going to append third-party data and I take the approach of just give me everything and I'll figure it out, I'm going to end up just totally stalled on that. But if I'm thinking about what do I want to do differently? Is there an operational change? And I need data to inform, who's going to get this treatment versus that treatment? Or is it some, personalized communication that I'm trying to base on what I know about the customer? And then what sorts of things can inform that? So you start at the end first and say, what is it that I want to change in my treatment of a customer, communication or otherwise, and then back in from that to the data side.
I completely agree. And I also would say that marketers have to be kind of willing to do it. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of talk and a lot of aspiration on the behalf of a lot of the brands that we work with. But if you're not going to execute on it, ultimately in the end, don't make the investment. You gotta follow through and figure out what I like to think of it as kind of making big data small, or making it actionable. What are the types of data elements that you are going to need to get you where you're trying to go? It's probably not 200 data elements. It's probably a couple handfuls of data elements. And when I talked at the beginning about that, like the different categories and the good, better, best, it's probably a few from each of those. Mm-hmm. You need to know income. You need to know age and household composition, to know who you're targeting. Right. But you also need that attitudinal information combined in there, as well as that transactional information to know what they've been spending on. And now more than ever, who's going to be in a position to spend as we start to get, recovery ready, is that the term we should use. But as we start to see markets opening up, who is going to be first spending, and how can you be there to communicate with them so that you can capture on that?
And that's a really good point, because then the next problem is people not connecting the data and the information they have to the creative and to the message that they're delivering.
Yes.
We've all talked about this, the four of us, about the disconnect in tone and maybe moving a bit away from transactional types of messages into more experiential messaging. So that's such a great point, because that then would contribute to what you're actually saying to people.
Yeah.
It's important to people right now. I don't mean to cut you off, Rob, but
that's all right.
I read an article just this morning on Hilton. Did you all see this? Hilton has partnered with the company that makes Lysol, and part of what they're doing is making sure that their hotels are going to be really clean, and they can say with confidence to consumers who are going to start to come out of this slowly, hey, you can come stay at our property. We've taken all of these precautions.
Right.
And that's a really good message to be telling people. Somebody mentioned trust earlier. You know, you've got to have trust and faith in some of these brands that they're doing all of those things now when we're all still sitting in our homes, so that they're ready to tell us and get us to go back to their properties.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that's a big driver. And if you think about this vertical, airplanes, cruise ships, you know, you just mentioned hotel rooms. And by the way, as a note, we all travel a lot for our work. Who thinks about the specific cleanliness of a hotel room? Most of us don't, right? Particularly with
not before now. Yeah.
Okay, now that's a whole new ball game, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's all, you know, quite different.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. One of the things we've sort of helped clients do in terms of this notion of how to use what data when is, you know, there's a couple different constructs, right? You sort of like one set of data from an investment standpoint, right? Like who should you be investing in? This gets a little bit to what Stacy and Bob were talking about in terms of, you know, don't just look at your own folio, so to speak. Like you got to understand their total spend across category, right? Because there could be people that look low value to you, but they are high value within the sector, right? So like a lot of that should drive your investment. The next is targeting, which I think is most people are fairly mature on, but it's, you know, mostly demographics and transactions. Like how do we just sort of target a group of people? Offer comes next, which is very much sort of about like real-time intent, like behaviors, like are they throwing up signals? Are they ready to buy? Do we think there can be sort of like more margin out of them, or do we have to discount them to get through the door? That's one data set. And then finally, I think is where a lot of people get tripped up is actually like what we're talking about just recently now, like the creative and the messaging, right? And that's a lot more sort of like the attitudinal and the preferential. And, you know, it's easy for us to say there's 4 broad categories, here's how it applies, but across the entire marketing and advertising organization, I see people cross-pollinating data into those buckets all the time, right? And I think it sort of creates things, it kind of creates a bit of a messy environment.
Yeah. And I think it's important to think about what's different now too. Like everything you described, Rob, we could have had that conversation 3 months ago, and it's still extremely important and relevant to people. You know, but what's different in this time, and we've touched a little bit on this belief that there's a lot of loyalty up for grabs, that people are kind of rethinking their commitment and their loyalty. We've talked about the importance of trust in a brand, and that comes to, you know, trust in safety when I come back to visit you, but also just trust that you know me, where data can inform that. But I think there's one thing too that, you know, we were talking a lot last week about how do you come out of recovery and what sort of messaging as people are starting to travel again. And, you know, do you see, Stacy, that there's opportunities to inform, you know, the timing of communication, and, you know, where I can use third-party data to know that it's okay now, or now's the right time to send Jason Simon an email about, you know, coming and visiting me again?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. The data that we at Epsilon are able to capture is really who is spending and who's buying now. So it's beyond just signal data of who's been searching and looking, because I think a lot of us are, you know, dreaming about our next trip and doing a lot of research online in hopes that someday we get to take that trip again.
Right.
But it's really, I can't travel. I live in Denver. You know, I'm still in my home through mid-May at the earliest. So when is that going to happen? You can rely on that transactional data to start to see which markets really are starting to open up and who is actually spending in those markets. And then being ready, kind of having your house in order is more critical at that moment. And that's going to be in the coming weeks and months for consumers to kind of get back to, I'm not going to say normal, I'm going to say back outside doing something different. So,
well, no, we even talked about, Stacy, like some of the markets, like Devin last week when he joined us, like local markets are going to open up. So that would open up a huge data opportunity, be able to identify, you know, if you looked at your loyalty file, if you were a big hospitality company, you know, our habits are going to change. So how do you know that, to your point?
Yeah.
And people are so, people are impacted so differently by this, you know, financially as well as personally, and, you know, different industries, and to try to make, you know, assumptions around that and plan your communication based on it is really challenging. But if you can actually use real transactional signals, you know, then that'll give you a lot more ability to be accurate.
You know, that's a really good point, and not one that we've covered, but when you think about analyzing your own first party data, it's not going to be as easy as it was before COVID because consumer habits are changing. So it's going to be really important to look at, I call it new to file. Yeah, it's more of a data term, but the consumers that are going to come back out of this by market, those newest consumers that are going to be spending with you, you need to analyze those as their own segment a little bit differently than historically the file makeup that you had, because there may be different consumers and the makeup of those could be very different.
Yeah,
that is a strong point to sort of get towards the end of today's conversation, because it is so encompassing. I mean, you know, Stacy, what phenomenal insight, because I just don't think people are thinking about this like you're thinking about this and your experiences bringing to the table. You know, any last thoughts, gang? We'll go around. We'll let Stacy get the last word here before we.
I mean, I'll go first. I've known Stacy for a lot of years, and in literally every conversation, I sort of learned something new. And I think her last point about sort of like previous transactional data is not a good indicator. I mean, that's, you know, to me, that's a bit of a watershed moment. You got to treat them as sort of new to file, net new customers. You got to learn very, very quickly about them and their behaviors and patterns.
Yeah. I think, you know, I would say my biggest takeaway is we should have waited a few weeks to have Stacy on, because it makes us all look a lot dumber now going forward. Deal with that. But I think, you know, I wish we had time to get into this more, but I would just like to kind of state that it's not a big process. And you know, Stacy, you can address this as well, but it's not, you know, it's not expensive to append third-party data, relatively speaking. It's not a lot of complexity internally like it is to try to grow your first-party data capture. And so I think at a time when budgets are tight, but you don't have a lot of transactional data coming in, adding noise, you know, it's a great opportunity to really take a step back and understand more about what you have.
Yeah, I would just wrap up and say now is the time. You know, it really is more critical. It's easy. You know, if you have a partner like us to help you really sift through all the data to help figure out what's the most meaningful for your brand. And to your point, Bob, based on what your goals are and what you're trying to accomplish, you know, at the end of a campaign, the investment is pretty low. And it's really going to pay off in spades by reaching those right consumers when they're getting back in market. It's going to be critical.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome. And I don't have anything to add to the really intelligent conversation this week. And as you know, Stacy, it wasn't that bad a circus, right?
It wasn't, no.
Yeah. But no, we really appreciate you coming by. We may ask you back at some point in the future, because I really believe what I said. We can sell and talk about marketing technology platforms and identity and all those other things around it. Without the data, they're not going to be effective. And I think you gave us some really good examples today of problems some people have sometimes with their own data and how people should be thinking about it. And I think it was just a fantastic episode of Epsilon from Home. So thanks, everybody.
Right.
And,
Thank you.
We'll see you soon. Thanks for joining us here on Epsilon from Home and LinkedIn and the Epsilon Resource Center.